One of man's greatest fears is death. And one of the most important things that we do here at the Institute is to show people that there is nothing to fear. They will survive physical death. The way we do that is we give them the tools, and they do it for themselves. To me, that's the most precious gift of my father's legacy, is that this process stands on its own. This all started in a lab, in a cabin, actually, in New York, back in 1956. He was looking at ways to see if you could learn during sleep.
The first problem was, how do you get people asleep? We don't want to use sleeping pills. So we developed a method in late 56 of helping people go to sleep utilizing sound wave patterns, because we were specialists in sound.
And through that, a separate and unknown state of consciousness came about.
Here I was lying in bed, waiting for this vibration to stop so I could go to sleep. And I began to think about Saturday and what a nice day Saturday would be, simply because of the fact that a cold front had come through, and it meant that up at Wurtsboro, where I was a member of a glider club, that the ridge lift would be tremendous. And that's when I found myself bumping against the ceiling. And in bumping against the ceiling, I didn't know what had happened until finally I looked around and said, oh, where am I? What is this? And I saw this flat thing I was lying on, as it were, like a concrete floor, and there was a fountain coming out of it. And the fountain, when I got positioned the other way around, was the chandelier hanging down from the ceiling, and I was bouncing against the ceiling. And I thought, oh, now I know what this is. Vibration is the beginning of the death process.
Children are very intuitive, and there was an intuitive knowing that there was something going on.
And I swam back down through the air to get back into the... And I was able to flop back in the body, and I sat up.
He didn't know what was happening to him. He thought he was dying.
I went back to the doctors, and they went through a whole series of tests. And so finally, I was very careful about this vibration and the control of it. But it got irritating, so I said, well, what the heck? Let's see what'll happen. And I went out again.
When I was at boarding school, you know how you are at boarding school when you're 15 years old and everything. So I was sitting there crying about something and felt the strong presence of my father. Didn't see him, felt it. I thought, oh, okay. So I kind of quit crying, went about my business, you know. And about 4 days later, I received a letter from my father saying, stop crying.
I went through a whole series of tests of verification, of going somewhere, doing something, observing things and stuff like that. And as a result, I got completely away from any fear, and that only did put together a much more devastating thing, and that's curiosity.
Through the research, we developed what's known as the hemisync technology, which is using certain frequencies, sound patterns, to balance the left and right brain and basically in a synchronistic state.
Continue to relax now. Continue your breathing. Notice your thinking pattern. Notice your environment. Here in the Monroe Institute laboratory, we work with people in an isolation booth to teach them how to move into different states of consciousness, to increase intuition, creative thought, to explore the realms of their own hypnagogic imagery. We provide them with a combination of sound patterns to help shape their brain waves into conducive states of consciousness. Raw brainwave patterns look very similar to what you might see on a polygraph machine. In this case, we simply turn those pages into a map of the brain. We can do that simply by asking for a different type of computer display. Here we've taken that same information and turned it into a map. This oval pattern represents the top of the head of the individual. This oval pertains to alpha waves, this one to theta waves, and this one over here to delta. We can move forward second by second here in time and see the brainwave patterns change. Breaking up of the alpha, moving a little bit better in here. And there's a nice theta picture. The alpha, resting state alpha, is broken down altogether. We have a nice clear and synchronous theta pattern. It's kind of an intuitive situation. You see this kind of happen. We would like to train the individual to recognize consciously when this happens by teaching people how to feel this intuitive sense. It can become part of one of the things that you know how to do. Now you can prolong that. It doesn't have to be just an intuitive flash, but you can learn to explore your intuitive knowledge simply by expanding that intuitive insight to take not just a couple of seconds, but a few minutes of your own in-depth exploration. It can be a very different kind of a world, not the same physical world we live in, but a mental world, a mental dimension in and of itself, filled with answers and understanding.
My father always brought me up by telling me to listen to my intuition, and I know he listened to that very much through this whole process, which has really brought us to where we are today.
Inevitably, our methods, and we don't deliberately do it, it just happens, produce a cessation of the fear of death. Because, as you could gather, we have means to let people know they are more than their physical body. And knowing you are more than your physical body is the beginning of knowing that you survived physical death. And knowing that is a tremendous relief in fear. Because if you know that you survived physical death, something else has happened. You are free